This was the case that didn't just shock America. It felt like a left scar. They just sentenced the killer, he get 130 years. But even with that, the details of what actually happened, they are the kind of things that makes even the most hardened investigators just shudder. Hey everyone, it's Dima. So this right here, this marks my first attempt at a true crime video. You probably know this right away. I've got an accent, I'm from Ukraine actually. Please don't mix it up with the Russian one, okay? I know, I apologize for it, but honestly, I'm kind of hoping it becomes my thing, you know? I'm sure it will get better over time, but for now, this is what we got, for better or worse. I'd love to know who's watching, so if you could, drop a comment, let me know where you're from, also what time it is for you, plus tell me what you think of the video. Seriously, every single comment means a lot. Alright, I won't keep you, go make a strong espresso, let's get into this. Alright, so let's talk about where this whole thing started. Delphi, in central Indiana, a place with fewer than 3,000 people. Honestly, I'm not even sure I could find 3,000 words to say about it. You just have this quiet little Midwestern town sitting along a stream called Deer Creek. Seriously, before all this happened, the town just felt like another one of those places you drive through without even noticing. The town got its name from Delphi in Greece, you know, where the old oracles supposedly told heroes their fate. But look, even the smartest fortune teller couldn't have predicted the horror about to happen there. So our story really gets going in February of 2017. On February 13th, 2017, the kids had a snow day, a planned day off from school. Two best friends, 13-year-old Abigail Abby Williams plus 14-year-old Liberty Libby German, took advantage of their free time. They just had a sleepover at Libby's grandma's house. Then, you know how teenagers are. They figured the best thing to do was go for a walk on the trails in the woods just east of town. Libby's older sister Kelsey dropped them off around 1:30 in the afternoon. The plan involved Libby's father coming to pick them up a little after 3. For that little window of time, they did what kids that age do. They wandered the woods, they laughed, they took pictures for Snapchat, but then everything changed fast. At 2:13 in the afternoon, Libby's phone recorded that now infamous video of the man on the bridge.
See, this is the path that we go down. There's no path going there, so we have to go down here. Hi.
That clip led right into the chilling audio of a man's voice telling the girls to get down the hill. Almost exactly an hour later, at 3:14, Libby's dad, Derek, showed up to the spot to pick them up. He tried calling his daughter's phone, but every call went straight to voicemail. Over the next couple of hours, that little note of worry, it turned into real full-blown panic. People started calling friends, then anyone they could think of. Until at 5:20 that evening, the call finally went in to report them as missing. So the search kept going all through the night. Then the next day, around noon, well, the worst possible news came back. They found them deeper in the woods, a little ways east of that bridge. Let me tell you, the scene the police walked in on, everyone said it went way beyond horrible. It was just strange, like deeply strange. Both girls had serious injuries to their necks. But that wasn't even the half of it. Their bodies had branches laid over them, but not in a way that looked like hiding. No, this felt different, almost like a ritual. The branches looked like they were placed there on purpose, in some kind of weird design. On a tree close by, they found some blood. Then on the trunk, someone had painted the letter F in red. Later on, tests confirmed that blood belonged to Libby. Here's where it gets even more confusing. They found Libby with no clothes on, but Abby, just a few feet from her, had all her clothes on. The truly bizarre thing, though, she had on Libby's clothes. It's like someone took her clothes off, then dressed her again, but in her friend's things, Abby also had very little blood on her, not like Libby. But she did have this odd line of blood going up her neck, which sort of suggested she'd been held upside down at some point, or maybe carried with her head hanging down. Look, Other than the girls themselves, the area showed no real signs of a fight. No scuff marks, nothing that looked like someone being dragged. For how violent this all was, there was surprisingly little blood around. Neither girl looked like she had even tried to fight back. But the police did find one small thing: a single, unspent .40 caliber bullet, just sitting there in the dirt. So from the start, it's horrifying. Two young girls viciously murdered. The scene itself looking like some kind of bizarre, incomprehensible ritual. This case honestly just feels so utterly heartbreaking. So on February 15th, the day after they found the girls, the Indiana State Police put out photos of the man they called the man from the bridge. Right away, this guy becomes suspect number one. A week later, they released that Down the Hill audio clip, pretty much begging the public for help. Help did come in. They got something like 10,000 tips in about a month. But honestly, after that initial burst, the case just went cold. For years, long years. That silence, that's what made this case so notorious. Even when I covered it myself back in 2019, it really felt like we would never get the truth. Over the next few years, different police sketches appeared, all based on what little witnesses saw. A few suspects popped up too. One of them, a 29-year-old guy named Keegan Kline, used the screen name Anthony Shots to talk to underage girls online. Plus, it came out that he had also talked to Libby. Of course, when that detail surfaced, a lot of people thought this has to be the guy. In the end, Kline got 43 years in prison for crimes related to child exploitation, but they never managed to link him to the girls' murders. Then, in September of 2022, when it seemed like all hope had disappeared, investigators were digging through old files. They stumbled across a note about a phone call. A call that came in way back in February of 2017. A man named Richard Allen had called to say he was also on those trails that same terrible day. But because of a ridiculous clerical error, he just slipped through the cracks for 5 long years. In the files, his name went down as Richard Allen Whiteman, not just Richard Allen. The reason? He lived on a street called Whiteman Drive. Once investigators finally spotted that mistake, they knew they had to take a serious second look at this guy immediately. On October 28, 2022, they officially arrested him, then charged him with the murders. They moved him to a maximum security prison, supposedly for his own safety. Richard Allen, 50 years old. He came right from the area, worked as a pharmacist over at the local CVS, lived less than a 5-minute drive from where they found the girls. He had a wife, a grown daughter. He would see the victims' families around town sometimes, but he didn't know them personally. The local community just felt stunned. Did the person responsible for this really hide in plain sight for all this time? The story got even wilder when a photo popped up showing him posing in front of one of the police sketches of the suspect. I mean, the whole thing feels unreal. Maybe the most chilling moment of all. So while the cops were searching his house, Richard's sitting in a patrol car with an investigator. The investigator tells him, hey, if they happen to break anything, he can file a claim for damages. Richard's reply was short. He just says something like, it doesn't matter, it's all over now. So if you thought the weirdness stopped there, let me tell you, you'd be wrong. The case just kept getting more tangled. Because of all the attention it got, the local judge stepped away, which brought a new person onto the scene, Judge Frances Gull. You know the saying about Lady Justice being blind? Well, this judge seemed to have perfect vision. Plus, she made it clear from day one that the defense team would have a tough road ahead. She immediately ordered the cameras out, making the entire trial private. This meant, unlike most big cases, the public would have no way to see what happened inside that courtroom. Then, before the trial even got started, a huge scandal just blew up. Somehow, crime scene photos got leaked online into the hands of some podcaster. Just imagine the cynicism of the person who did that. The weirdest part, the trail for the leak led back to the office of Allen's own lawyers. Although the story there gets even muddier, like someone just walked in, took pictures of everything, then vanished. In response, a furious Judge Gull kicked Richard Allen's entire defense team off the case, though they did get reinstated later. The person who leaked those photos, well, he later did something dangerous to himself. This case just had tragedy baked into it from every single angle. After that whole incident, it seemed like Judge Gall decided to tighten the screws all the way. She banned the defense from even mentioning any other suspects. Think about that for a second. The police spent years looking at other people. They had other sketches out there. But in court, none of it could come up. Only one suspect existed, Richard Allen, period. The wall the defense team faced just got higher. The judge moved Allen to a prison farther away, which made it much harder for his lawyers to work with him. She rejected their expert witnesses who were supposed to talk about the ballistics. When a key defense witness, an FBI agent, couldn't make it in person but asked to testify over Zoom, which honestly happens all the time, these days the judge just said, nope, not today. So, with the defense pretty much handcuffed, what did the prosecution have left? They had one thing they saw as a knockout punch: Richard Allen himself. According to them, he didn't just act as the man on the bridge, he admitted to the whole thing himself. Not once, not twice. When I say many times, I mean more than 60 times. To his wife during her visits, to the guards who brought him his meals, to the psychologists evaluating him, it felt like he told anyone who would listen. The prosecution painted this picture of a sick, twisted person with a dark plan. Someone who went out that day hunting for victims, laid in wait, then took his chance when he saw the girls. They had no idea that Libby, sensing the danger, had secretly managed to record her own killer. The prosecutors argued these weren't just empty words either. He knew details only the killer could know. For instance, during one confession, he said he planned to sexually assault the girls, but the white van driving by spooked him, so he killed them quickly instead. Here's the interesting part. Nobody ever publicly mentioned that van, the one driven by a man named Brad Weber. They kept that detail secret, so how could Allen have known about it? He also mentioned a box cutter used in the attack, another detail the public never heard. Finally, that unspent bullet found on the ground. Allen explained he had racked the slide on his pistol, probably to scare the girls, which caused the live round to eject. Again, a detail they never released. Every one of these coincidences added more weight to the prosecution's story. And right here, friends, the case that seemed so simple starts to fall apart right before your eyes. Because the prosecution lays out its cards, plus at first glance, it looks like a royal flush. First up, you have Richard Allen himself, who puts himself at the crime scene at the exact same time. Second, the clothes. Police search his house, they find items that look strikingly similar to the ones in that blurry man from the bridge photo. The voice? Oh, that voice. They play the recording, it sounds eerily similar. One officer who listened to over 700 of Allen's jail calls says he's not just sure he's 1000% positive it's the same person. Add the witnesses to this. Not one, not two, but 3 or 4 people who saw a man on the trails that day. A man who, they said, had mud on him, maybe even blood. His car gets spotted on surveillance cameras nearby. Finally, the weapon. They find his pistol, a ballistics expert, a woman who swears under oath she has never made a mistake in her entire career, says the markings on the unspent bullet appear consistent with his weapon. Meaning, she can't rule out that the bullet came from this exact gun. So, you have a guy who looks like him, sounds like him. People saw him at the scene. His weapon connects to the case. Let's not forget, he confessed over 50 times, sharing details only the killer could know. Well, what more do you need, right? Case closed, he's going down. But then the defense takes the stage. Their story sounds completely different. Their theory, it's not about innocence. It's about a failed investigation, about tunnel vision, where investigators got so fixated on one version of events, they stopped seeing everything else. They begin to tear the prosecution's evidence to shreds. That infamous Snapchat video, the defense shows the original. It's just a choppy, indecipherable mess of movement. That famous frame the whole world saw, someone pulled it out, stretched it, enhanced it. But as the defense says, when you enhance a blur, you just get a clearer blur. Or sometimes you distort reality completely. As Libby's stepfather said, hell, that could have been me. That could have been half the men in Delphi. It could have even been half the women. The down the hill audio, also enhanced. The timing doesn't add up here either. If the man from the bridge in the video said those words, he would have had to run to catch up to the girls. But the voice on the recording sounds calm, not out of breath. What about Richard Allen himself? At the time, he was 44, not tall, a little heavyset. Here's the kicker. Not a single witness specifically identified him. Those young girls who saw the man on the trail, they didn't remember his face. They remembered him because when they politely said hello while passing, this strange man said nothing back. He just stared in silence. Here's what else those teenage girl witnesses said. The man they saw didn't look old. He looked to be in his 20s. He definitely stood taller than them, plus their height measured around 170 centimeters. A reminder, Richard Allen at that time was 44, plus his height measured 162 centimeters. So the person they described appeared younger, much taller, maybe even evil. But that's not all. Another female witness describes a totally different person, a handsome, muscular man with thick brown hair who also didn't seem short. She also saw a completely different car in the parking lot, not the kind Allen drove. So who are all these people? We don't know. They were never found. The police sketches released over the years, they look like two completely different people because they came from two different people's descriptions. One, at a stretch, could look like Allen. But who's the other guy? The much younger one. Who is he? So this brings us to the only piece of physical evidence that, according to the prosecution, links Allen to the crime scene. Because honestly, this case has a serious lack of any physical proof whatsoever. That single piece of evidence, it was same unspent cartridge. The prosecutors say it matches Allen's gun, but the defense expert looks at the same bullet, then says, no, it doesn't match at all. He states he found no unique tool marks on it that the mechanisms of Allen's pistol would have left. Here's where a key detail comes out. The prosecution's expert, to get a sample, fired Allen's gun. Then she compared the markings from that fired casing to the markings on the unspent round from the crime scene. The defense expert says that's like comparing apples to oranges, they're just different things. To top it off, the state's own expert admitted the bullet could have come from many other guns, but the defense couldn't even suggest whose guns those might have been, because remember, the judge banned any mention of anyone besides Richard Allen. Finally, the search itself. The girls vanished, volunteers plus police searched all night, but they only found the bodies the next day, around noon, in an area they supposedly already cleared. So a question pops up. Either the girls weren't there during the night, or the search was, to put it mildly, poorly done. Maybe, but the woods in the middle of winter are pretty bare. Calling this investigation bad, that might be the understatement of the year. They didn't even properly secure the crime scene. This sloppiness the defense talked about just continued. That same unspent bullet, they didn't even photograph it in place, like you're supposed to. Those strange branches laid out on the bodies, they just raked them into a pile off to the side. They didn't collect them as evidence for weeks. Plus, crucially, they never tested them for DNA, even though the police themselves admitted someone likely placed them there by hand. But maybe the clearest example is the hair. A long hair with a root still attached, tangled in Abby's finger. For 7 years, nobody touched it. 7 years. The authorities just assumed it probably belonged to a family member. Finally, right before the trial, they tested it. Sure enough, it belonged to Libby's sister, Kelsey. But this just proves how sloppy the investigation got. When you have such an obvious piece of evidence sitting there, you ignore it for 7 years, a logical question follows. What else did you miss? Here's another huge point. Not a single cell of Richard Allen's DNA turned up on the girls or at the crime scene. Plus, none of their DNA turned up in his car, in his house, or on his clothes. This happened despite witnesses, remember, describing a man covered in mud plus blood. Then the defense called their own FBI expert who analyzed Libby's phone. His findings contradicted the prosecution's entire story. He stated the prosecution's expert did a very superficial job. According to his data, around 5:30 in the evening hours after the murders, someone plugged something into the phone's headphone jack, probably to silence a call. Then, around 10 p.m., they unplugged the device. Again, the killer likely did this, but the prosecution says Allen left the crime scene at 4 o'clock. So how could Allen have the phone? Or did the real killer stay with the bodies all night while the search went on, only to return them to the woods later? Add to this the official FBI profile, which puts the man from the bridge's height between 167 plus 178 centimeters. Allen, at 162 centimeters, just doesn't fit. Finally, the defense took on the prosecution's trump card, those 60-something confessions. To understand where they came from, you have to look at what happened to Richard Allen after his arrest. They didn't send him to a normal jail to await trial. No. They threw him into a maximum security prison, solitary confinement. People say Hannibal Lecter had better living conditions. Seriously. They kept him in a bare cell where the light never shut off. The toilet sat by his head. A thin blanket barely covered him. At times, they put him in a straitjacket. No windows. He ate on a floor where mice plus ants ran around. He lived like this for 13 months. That's a very long time. For the first few months, he had zero contact with his family. You have to understand, you can't keep a person in solitary for more than 30 days, because their brain just starts to break. Alan already had a diagnosis of severe depression before all this. He took medication for it, so he broke. Doctors documented how he gradually became psychotic. He began smearing his own feces on the walls, then eating it. It's just horrific. It's during this exact period, at the peak of his psychosis, that he made all those confessions. He confessed to killing Libby plus Abby, saying the motive involved a sexual component. He also confessed to sexually molesting his daughter plus his sister, to killing his wife, who, by the way, remains alive, to killing his daughter, who also lives, to killing his granddaughter, who he never had. One more detail. He said he shot the girls, but they weren't shot. But what about the details? Only the killer could know. This is probably the prosecution's strongest point. The defense provides an answer that sounds wild. The psychologist who worked with Alan noted that right around the time he started losing his grip on reality, they gave him access to all his case files, including detailed reports plus crime scene photos. She even saw him literally eating the papers, devouring them. The prison guards, of course, believed he was just faking madness. But honestly, you'd have to have an incredible commitment to the role to go so far as eating your own waste. The defense held their ground. Richard Allen is not the guy. They argued that the police, after failing to solve the case for 5 years, just found a convenient suspect, then ignored everything that didn't fit their theory. But on the other hand, maybe they focused on him because too many things pointed his way. The clothes, the voice, the timeline, that single bullet. The idea that the man from the bridge couldn't have been short is debatable too. The video shows his jeans bunched up at the bottom, a thing that often happens with shorter people. That was the trial. It ran from October to November of 2024. After 4 days of deliberations, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. They found Richard Allen guilty of the murders of the 2 girls on that February day. His sentencing will happen in December of 2024. He faces 130 years behind bars. So there you have it. This case, it's break your heart, leaves behind more questions than answers. The investigations was messy. The conditions they kept Allen in, inhumane. Honestly, a heated debate still rages on about whether they even got the right guy. The defense attorneys weren't allowed to present any other suspects, so could it have been someone else? This is where we get into some really murky territory, because the FBI plus the police really did look into a whole string of other very strange suspects. Judge Gold decided no evidence connected them to the crime, but let's be honest, no DNA connected Allen either. So now we're diving into territory that sounds like a script from a good season of True Detective, the one with the cult. Connections to Norse pagan beliefs. I know, it sounds completely nuts, right? Odinism, ritual murders, but you know, if you dig a little deeper, things aren't so simple. Traditional Norse beliefs have nothing to do with white supremacy or killing. However, lately, some far-right groups have started using these symbols for their own, let's just say, strange purposes. A special FBI task force started investigating a possible link between the Delphi murders plus Odinist groups, which, it turned out, had a pretty active presence in Indiana. This isn't just a rumor. Richard Allen's defense team filed an official 158-page motion that stated it plainly. The girls were ritually sacrificed by members of a pagan cult, co-opted by white nationalists, leaving Richard Allen as an innocent man. The idea of a ritual murder didn't come from nowhere. Remember that rune painted in blood on the tree, plus the branches arranged on the bodies in a shape resembling Norse symbols. To be fair, at first the FBI showed a photo to a university professor who said it didn't look like any cult he knew. But when investigators started digging, they found a whole network of bizarre individuals. First, Brad Holder, a man rumored to have deep involvement in Odinism. Libby's own grandmother pointed the police toward him. Even stranger, Holder was the father of Libby's boyfriend. He posted disturbing things on Facebook, runes, photos of branches that looked eerily similar to the crime scene. One detective even stated this post didn't seem like a coincidence. An FBI agent who wanted to check Holder's alibi was later killed by an ex-prison guard named Shane Meehan. Holder's friend, Patrick Westphal, also an Odinist. Word is they often held rituals in those same woods, then supposedly had a falling out over one that went wrong. Right in February of 2017. What a strange coincidence. The third, Elvis Fields, a friend of both. Here's the shocking part. According to his sister, Fields confessed to her that he killed the girls on the very day they went missing. The sister, horrified, ran to the police, But her report apparently just got lost in the thousands of other tips. She later passed a polygraph test which showed she wasn't lying, but we can't verify the results because the officer who ran the test died in a mysterious fire. What are the chances of that? Elvis himself, described as having the mind of a child, provided a perfect alibi years later. He claimed he was at the hospital 2 hours away that day. Why was his phone off? Well, you know, they ask you to turn off your phone in hospitals. Convenient, isn't it? But the most insane part of this whole theory surfaced when Alan's lawyers visited him in prison. They noticed many of the guards wore patches on their uniforms that read "In Odin we trust." Imagine their shock. The people guarding their client belonged to the same cult. They demanded Alan be moved, fearing for his life. The request was denied. The patches, they just mysteriously vanished. Prison guards, like Shane Meehan, the ex-guard who killed the FBI agent investigating Odinism. Strange, right? Maybe this whole Odinism story is complete nonsense, but it's very, very strange. Even if it has no connection to the murders, it suggests some very dark things go on around Delphi. Despite all this, they found Richard Allen guilty of these horrific, heartbreaking murders. This case is upsetting because the victims were so innocent. Of course, Allen will file an appeal. The trial had many questionable moments, plus many questions were left unanswered, especially about his confinement plus his sanity. It was not cool. He got his conviction. The case is closed. At least from law enforcement's point of view. But like I said, real wars still rage online over whether he's guilty or not. It's a tough situation. Yes, juries can get it wrong, but they saw evidence we didn't. The court proceedings weren't broadcast. On the other hand, they weren't allowed to hear a single piece of evidence about other suspects, so they didn't see the full picture either. It's really hard. So were his confessions just the ramblings of a psychotic person? Well, a prison psychiatrist testified that Allen also confessed during moments when he appeared perfectly lucid. This entire unbelievable saga, in the end, started because Richard Allen himself called the police to say he was on that trail. Everything revolved around him. So the jury decided he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Was there, a cover-up? Was there multiple people there? Who knows? 2 girls went for a walk, never came home. A sentence, even one for 130 years, won't bring them back to their parents. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what shocked you the most about this case. Stay safe. See ya.